Hello and welcome to episode number 35 of the 11FS Spotlight Show. My name is David Brear, and in this weekly show, we shine a bit of a spotlight on the best and the brightest in the tech and financial services industry to understand really what it's that gets them going, growing, and where they think the future of the industry is really going. A big part of this show is always your involvement and your questions. So if you want to get involved, leave them in the comments sidebar and we'll weave them into the conversation as we go. On today's Spotlight, I'm joined by Cameron Hejazi, who is the co-founder of Scent. Welcome to the show, Cameron. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. We talked about this just before, but where are you joining us from today for everybody else's benefit?
The good old Midwest. I'm in Chicago.
Very, very good. I miss it. I miss it very much. So fingers crossed we get to go on planes and stuff soon, and I'll be back over there very shortly. But so on today's show, what we're going to be doing is talking a little bit about Cameron and his work at Scent, as well as the impact of NFTs on the environment. So maybe if we start off, Cameron, to get us going, can you tell us a little bit about your role at Scent?
Sure. So I'm co-founder at Scent, CEO, and a lot of my responsibility is to help grow the team and make sure that we're steered toward our mission, which is to enable anyone to earn a creative income. That was largely born out of the observation that we spend so much time on digital networks, adding value, whether it's posting our thoughts, comments, engaging with others. So much there is just kind of being given away for free. And we see a huge opportunity in enabling people to turn that into a source of work that they can ultimately live on.
Very good. I mean, we'll unpack that a little bit more because there's a lot in there, and there's a lot in what you're doing with Scent as well. But what brought you to this point? What did you do before Scent?
Before Scent, I worked in digital advertising, and I was helping small publishers monetize their content by connecting them to ad exchanges and trying to basically extract every dollar that they could, every eyeball, every click that they could in the form of advertising revenue. And that was what kind of made me very aware of the sort of inequities between content creators, audiences, publishers, advertisers, and kind of how the power balance favors certain people that aren't necessarily the ones creating a lot of the value. And that pushed me to kind of think about alternative systems and pushed me to start Scent to try and solve some of those problems that I saw.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? The digital sort of revolution is kind of, the word democratized is thrown around a lot, but when it comes to content creation and distribution, then, we're living in a fundamentally different world than we were, even 10 years ago in terms of actually the ability for people to create content and distribute it. So it goes to say, I guess, the monetization of that and the rights management around that is a particularly hot topic, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not a knock on these social networks and platforms that have, profited so heavily off of creating their services. Like that's fine, because at the time it was very necessary to create these forms of distribution, like you're saying, right? Before that, there was email, like personal blogs. It was very hard to get an audience anywhere on the internet. It was very peer-to-peer, but now we're seeing that there's actually a strong desire for people to form smaller communities, more localized, direct relationships with each other. And so it's just an evolving business model.
And you guys describe Scent as a creativity exchange. Can you sort of unpack that a little bit more? Because I mean, that fit for me, as you say, that marketplace creation and all the things that are around that's really important given the circumstances that we operate in. So can you unpack that a little bit more for the viewers?
Yeah, I think the fundamental insight is that, creativity in whatever form it takes is a thing of value. And our role is to help you unlock that value in whatever way that we can. And so for the past several years, we've been experimenting with different mechanisms, like what happens if you put a reward on a best reply to a post that you've made, both as a way of getting engagement, but also incentivizing people to kind of come and really put their best thoughts forward. Or what happens if you support someone early on in their creative career and they go on to become more successful over time? What upside is there for you? All of these modes of interaction that we've been experimenting with are centered around the idea that you are doing things of creative value that aren't currently being reflected back to you in the form of financial value. And so the exchange part is about taking that creativity and pairing it with a financial component and that varies case by case in terms of the problem that we're trying to solve, but it always revolves around those two things.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, this is an industry, you know, I sort of liken it. We've seen revolutions we talk a lot about financial services at 11FS, but, you know, we've seen the industries with media industry or the news industry, you know, the revolution that digital has brought about. Initially, actually, the models look very similar. And really, I mean, if you think sort of laterally a little bit in terms of where the early days of content creation was on the internet, then, as you say, you know, even YouTube, right? YouTube owned all of the monetization of those things in such a major way. But obviously, with micro content exploding with TikTok and all different types of things, then, you know, actually the ownership and distribution of those things, the value, to your point, the value shouldn't just be with the platforms doing distribution, but with creators, right? So it's interesting how it's sort of going full circle. Well, I don't. I'm going to get carried away and go back to you know, almost the 1400s, 1500s, when people are selling artwork. You know, actually, you know, the first value exchange has to come from the artist to the buyer, rather than from the distributor of those things, if that makes sense. It's an interesting problem that you're solving. So, I mean, you guys must have seen, I guess, over the last 18 months, 24 months, just such an explosion in people wanting to monetize, or actually even just wanting to control from a rights perspective these things. So have you seen a steady incline, or has it been more of an explosion?
Definitely more of a parabolic move. You know, these things kind of tend to rise dramatically and then kind of cool off for periods of time and keep going in that fashion. It's largely something that I've observed just working in the crypto industry in general, right? The transition from sort of just a bunch of nerds to early adopters to sort of crossing the chasm into the early majority. It all comes in waves. We've been particularly fortunate in that our mission around enabling this sort of creative income via this creativity exchange has attracted a lot of the people that are also really interested in just broadly the content monetization industry. And NFTs have been a part of our network for a long time. And so when the NFT movement started to really gain traction, we were one of the de facto places where people went to kind of coordinate and learn about it, get involved, connect with other people. And so as a result of that, we did see a pretty big swell in terms of the number of people that are engaging on our platform and using our services.
And who typically, what's your audience? Who's your target audience for your services right now? What type of, if they're listening to this and they're like, look, I've had that itch to scratch for a long time to create me some great content, who are the sort of people that you're looking for?
Well, I think the people that we're looking for and the people that are there are, we as a company want to really push the ball forward and expand beyond crypto audiences and the sort of echo chamber that is this sort of niche technology movement. A lot of the people who use our products and services are ones who already understand the technology, have already accepted it, and are sort of deeply embedded in it. They call themselves crypto artists. So it's part of their identity, right? And so these are the people that are very familiar with and rely on our services. And so part of our responsibility and what we want to try and do is really create a place where we can help educate and sort of expand the circle so that we're welcoming to, people who might not know what a blockchain is or have any cryptocurrency. And so that's a goal for us that's aspirational, and we're just starting on that. I would say today, the primary audience that we're serving are these crypto artists, which is a growing number every day.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, that's not as small a niche as it sounds, given the audience and given the people who engage in the community. So, but it's interesting, isn't it? Actually, they by default buy into the technology, therefore they by default buy into the protection that it brings them in terms of the way in which you go about doing it. I guess to that point, though, almost. The best use cases are always the ones that solve problems. And if you can solve the problem, people don't really care about the technology in the mainstream. They care that the problem is solved for them. So But you mentioned NFTs, so just touching on that a little bit. I mean, how much has that affected the way in which you can deliver your services, and where do you sort of think we are sort of heading in that? It might be worth actually sort of starting off, because the audience is quite broad for this. But do you want to give us a bit of a background for NFTs? Because while they've just sort of shot into the limelight, they've actually been around for a while, haven't they?
Yeah, I think it was 2017, maybe 2018, Dapper Labs released CryptoKitties, which was a game that let you collect and breed cats. And this was the first, in my perception, sort of standard around digital ownership that wasn't particular to a platform or wasn't particular to a particular service. Meaning, I could take my CryptoKitty and I'd never have to go to Dapper Labs website again. I could just hold on to that forever and emerge from a cave like 100 years later. Dapper Labs could have gone bust, and I would still have my CryptoKitty. This is something that did not exist prior to the NFT standard. You would think about, a blogging site that shut down because they ran out of money and weren't able to be profitable, and as a result, all of the bloggers' posts had been deleted. This type of pattern has occurred time and time again on the internet. And so the revelation here was that using these blockchain systems, we can actually create this notion of permanence, this notion of ownership. And so that example was like very narrow because it was a game, right? But it got really interesting for me because the next time I interacted with NFTs was in another game. It was called Crypto Voxels. The difference being, so in Crypto Voxels, you could own the land. It was a 3D map, right? And you could own pieces of land. And that part itself wasn't interesting for me. What was interesting, though, is that an economy formed on top of that, where your avatars in the game could have custom items, and those items could be created by anyone, and they were NFTs as well. So there was these layers forming. There was an economy forming, and you could see anyone kind of with a creative vision being able to come in and create something of value in this ecosystem, not just Dapper Labs or not just the people who made Crypto Voxels, but anyone, and turn it into a digital good. And at that point, I was like, okay, this is the future, right? This is unlocking creativity for anyone who wants to contribute to this ecosystem and creating those notions of permanence and ownership. And so that was my red pill.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because, like you say, it goes from ownership, as in a skin for an avatar, to usage when it comes to music or video or whatever. And it really is a fascinating sort of rabbit hole to go down, isn't it? In terms of what therefore can then be attributed in this way. But you sort of touched on it a little bit, and maybe just unpacking it slightly. We've seen sort of walled gardens attempts at these types of things not using DLT. We've seen DRM, digital rights management for music industry. But as you said, actually, it's always been, Apple's version of a thing, or, Google's version of a thing, or whatever. This is the first time. I mean, we never thought when we were trying to solve for interoperability, it wasn't interoperability of CryptoKitties, but it's a great place to start, isn't it? So is that why you think that this is really sort of hit more of a mainstream and taken off now, because of that sort of disassociation from the seller?
Absolutely. I think that, we relied on services like Apple Music in the past because they were coordination mechanisms between people when we didn't have any. But now so many people are online and they discover things through social media, and they have that opportunity to form a direct relationship with the person who creates the value. And so why not just layer onto that relationship and have the monetization channel directly between them as well? People are realizing this, especially those who are creating digital value, see the opportunity to just go directly to their fans, sell their work directly to them. Not only are they being compensated very well in some cases, they're also being able to form a relationship that otherwise wouldn't be possible through the intermediary, because the intermediary is kind of brokering the two parties and they never really meet each other. So it's definitely attractive for many different parties that are entering the space.
So one of the things, and it's fascinating. Like I've me and Simon Taylor have talked about this extensively internally to 11FS in terms of where it is, and we sort of sit. Do you know what, I scraped being a millennial by like 25 days, and his argument is basically I don't get it because I'm old, which I kind of probably have to attest to. But it's interesting that some of the NFTs that are being purchased, as you say, are going for just amazing sums of money for a digital asset initially that in my mind was not really it wasn't really ownership. It was almost a receipt of the thing that exists somewhere. But it has moved on, and I think with the work that you guys are doing at Cent, it's moved on much more to rights management and usage, which I think is massively sensible, because you really can so categorically say when somebody is doing that or not doing that. But one of the things that has been sort of labeled a little bit against NFTs is obviously the sort of environmental impact. The usage, electricity usage, particularly for actually creating these things, is pretty significant in terms of where it is. So, I mean, there is this sort of general view that crypto is bad for the environment more broadly. But what would you sort of say to that?
I would say that the people in the ecosystem are listening, and they are reacting and responding to that very concern, at least certain factions of the crypto movement. There are currencies that have this exogenous dependency on electricity that is enormous, and that creates a huge burden on the environment just by the nature of the thing operating, right? It is massive overkill in many cases, and a lot of the innovation that's happening aims to solve that very problem. It aims to take that exogenous dependency and instead flip it to something that's endogenous. That, the analogy I like to think about is, right now it is super inefficient, but imagine in the future there's a subway station, and what you're doing when you're contributing to this network is you're actually building a new station that's connected to the rest of the network. So what you're helping out is all of the people that are in the transit system. You're focusing on providing a green solution that is not so dependent on fossil fuels. And it is also helping route things around more efficiently by creating lines that connect people directly to each other. So there are factions within the movement that are focused on this. I am very sympathetic to that. Ethereum is one such currency. But they're not there yet. We actually at Cent use a layer 2 called Polygon, which is there. Polygon's network is actually comparable to something of like a video game network. If you could imagine all of the users who are playing Fortnite at a given time, that's Polygon's energy consumption. And that is much more reasonable because it makes different trade-offs. I think that there are vastly different concerns when you're analyzing a system that's intended to move trillions of dollars versus moving an in-game asset like a skin. And we're focused on the more media side of things, and we definitely believe that the environmental impact cannot be ignored. You cannot have, a huge carbon footprint just for acquiring something as minuscule as maybe a badge, and so we definitely acknowledge the problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? The point you raised there is maybe it's not the necessarily the inefficiencies in the system; it's the nature in which we produce electricity that actually we need to really address. Because to your point, actually, if all of our electricity was coming from solar power, wind power, water movement, then hydropower, then actually we could be in a situation where it actually becomes much more irrelevant where it's coming from. It's what we're doing with it, isn't it? And I haven't heard anybody make that argument yet, but it's a pretty sensible one, because it's true. Whatever we use the electricity for, if we're cutting down trees or mining coal or whatever, then it really becomes irrelevant, doesn't it? I'd like to see you tell my son that Fortnite skins are not important, though. Like he definitely would disagrey with you on wholeheartedly on that front. But I mean, you talk a little bit about efficiencies within the networks as well, particularly when you sort of talk about something like Ethereum. I mean, is it practical given the nature of how distributed ledger technology works, to actually create more of an efficient system? Because I think there are some sort of inherent requirements around how these systems are working, which inevitably will lead to them always being quite energy inefficient in terms of the creation. But to your point, I wonder if it is just the nature of what we're doing with it right now. If it was a £1 billion transaction from South America to Russia, then actually it's much more tenable, the use of electricity. But are we able to create that efficiency, do you think?
We are. I actually should have been more clear. So there are some blockchains that by definition are architected around that very capital intensive energy requirement. A lot of the research that's been going into how we can solve this problem is around taking that external requirement and shifting it to an internal requirement, so that instead of requiring a ton of capital in the form of electricity, you're requiring capital in the form of cryptocurrency, and that is the thing that you're putting up at stake as part of securing the network. And the more that the industry can start transitioning to that model, which is referred to as proof of stake, the more that we're going to be able to reduce the cost to something like a video game network operating in terms of electricity requirements. And so I am very bullish on that. I believe that is where this whole creative movement is going to naturally tend to go toward, not so much the energy inefficient solutions like what Bitcoin uses. And Ethereum has a plan as well to transition to this stake-based approach. They're not there yet. And so I think that's what we're seeing a lot of the criticisms come at is, yes, today Ethereum does use a lot of energy, and it is acknowledged that it is not okay. And that's been heard in the form of a roadmap to overcome that. But the problem cannot be ignored. It needs to be called out. And so I think that the people who are raising the flags are, they're justified in doing so, because we have to do better and we have to get there, and we can't be lax about it because the environment is very important.
I mean, it's an interesting tension, isn't it? The younger generations buying into, ESG and everything that comes with that, but equally buying into, decentralized currencies, decentralized, power structures away from, central governments and central banks in terms of the sense. So there's a really interesting balance there between those two things in terms of, societal change that comes about with decentralization of control of these things, but then environmental impact. So I'm sure it'll be something that the pros and the cons will be weighed up as we go, but it'll be fascinating to see how this plays out. I mean, what do you think will happen in the NFT space then? Do you think, obviously with the amount of transactions we're seeing, the amount of use cases are really rising, and really the amount of money that's changing hands as well is really sparking more and more and more interest. Where do you see the NFT market going to?
I see it taking over everything. I think that this notion of digital permanence is something that we really haven't fully coped with yet. I think the full manifestation of it is something analogous to digital identity, right? You having a full set of attributes around you. You can get a loan on this open public infrastructure. You can get an accredited education on this open public infrastructure. And the underpinnings of that are having all of these assets, all of this data around you in your control that you can make useful in whatever capacity people want to build on. And I think that's something super powerful. And, it's orders of magnitude more data than what we're seeing in the NFT world today, right? We're talking about maybe on a given day, let's say there are 10,000 NFTs minted, hundreds of thousands. There are billions of data points being created today on any given social network. Like, you just take one of them, right? We're talking billions of data points, and we're thinking about ways in which that data can be ported into a structure like an NFT on a blockchain, where you own it, you control it, and ultimately others can come to you and say, I want to make this data useful for you. The path to getting there is obviously like we're here talking about the environmental challenges today. Orders of magnitude more adoption means a system that needs to be able to handle orders of magnitude more strain, and is going to require serious thinking. And I'm really fortunate that there are people that I know of in the space who are working on this, But it is such an important problem because this notion, once you give someone the ability to own something in the digital realm, which, like I said, has not existed before this, you're not going to give up that right. You're not going to have it go away. That's something that's here to stay. And we're just feeling out the use cases, right? It's just starting with rare digital art, but it's going to creep into all aspects of what we do online. And so, I'm so excited personally.
Yeah, it is exciting. It does feel like we're at the start of beginning of a long journey, doesn't it? Because when you start getting to the point of identity and you start getting to the point of, all of your individual data, then that is a thing that people are not going to give up very easily. But just before we go, because we've got to wrap up, what's next for Scent then? Because as you say, if this is the tip of the iceberg, then really the potential for you being early on this and being successful in this is an amazing beginning to a journey, right?
Yeah. We've been very fortunate in that we've been focused on the problem, and the problem is not getting a lot of the spotlight in the broader industry. And so we've been able to sort of put our thoughts out there and get traction as a result of it. I think what to look for from us, we launched in December a product that allowed you to turn your tweets into NFTs. And so that caused some waves. Jack Dorsey sold his tweet. Several other notable figures sold their tweets through our platform. And for us, that was the start of an insight that there is so much value that is trapped in traditional social networks. We call them Web 2 social networks, sort of that second generation of the web. And so what we're really thinking about and interested in doing is taking an approach to unlock the value that is in these networks on behalf of the people who are creating the value. So thinking beyond just tweets, what else can we do to serve the people who have already built years of work in their online presence, in their online profiles on a platform that might not be our social network, but something like Twitter, something like Instagram, and unlock that value for them. And so we're going to be releasing some pretty cool stuff later this year around that.
Very cool. We'll definitely have to get you back on to talk about that a little bit more. But it is an amazing change in the industry, and as you say, sort of really, democratizing where that value goes for creation of it, not just to the platforms, but to the people making it. So it's really, really exciting. Thank you so much, Cameron, for joining us. Where can people learn a little bit more about what you guys are up to?
Yeah, I would say check out Twitter/Scent. We are Scent on Twitter, and then Scent.co. Our website has a nice overview of kind of what we're offering.
Very good. Well, I'm off to try and sell all of my tweets. I think there's quite a few of them out there, so fingers crossed I might be able to retire pretty soon, which is good. That's all we have for time this week. Make sure you follow us over on 11FS on LinkedIn. I think we're on pretty much every social media channel at this stage, but if you want to catch up on any of the previous shows, then head over to the 11FS YouTube channel where you can catch up on all of them there. Hope you have a great week, everybody. Goodbye.